Sure.
All right, welcome everybody. I see that we have now already 15 people who are attending this meeting. This breakout session will be on public leadership in the age of interconnectedness. And today's breakout we will do a little bit differently. So what we are trying to achieve is to have like an open dialogue. So if you have any questions, we will invite you into this session and you can participate within the dialogue itself. So it will be about the public sector organizations and leaders in order to deliver sustainable development goals. And for that, I would like to introduce our very interesting key speakers. Unfortunately, Luce van Kemper, the Crown member of the Socio-Economic Council, couldn't join us today due to personal circumstances. But Rob van Tulder has been so kind to be flexible and to join us and share his thoughts on public leadership as well. So thank you, Rob. I would like also to welcome Maresa Oosterman. She should be joining us in a little bit. Maresa is Director of SDG Netherlands. And although both Rob and Maresa are not directly representing a public sector organization, they are both heavily involved with these sectors. And they both have a lot of knowledge on what is needed by these sectors to reach our 2030 SDG agenda. So my name is Tom van Amersfoort. I'm currently a master's student Global Business and Sustainability at Erasmus University, and I will moderate this breakout session together with Luke Edison, who is part of the PeaceJam European Youth Team. And Luke will now explain a bit more in detail how we want to arrange this session.
Super. Thank you very much, Tom. Welcome to the session, to our speakers and to you, our guests. As Tom mentioned, my name is Luke. I've been working with PeaceJam for about 7 years. PeaceJam, as you would have heard from Kailash earlier, is a global peace education organization that works closely with young people and the Nobel Peace Laureates. For today's session, we'll be hearing from our 2 expert speakers, but not in a conventional way that you may be used to. Too many speaker events, bring in great speakers, have them speak for around 30 or 40 minutes, and then try and squeeze in a Q&A in the last 5 minutes, and you're lucky if your question gets picked. So instead, myself and Tom wanted to make this session as interactive as possible and maximize our interaction with our speakers. We want it to feel more like a conversation with the speakers rather than a speaking event. And therefore, our speakers will speak for just 5 minutes each, starting with Rob and Maresa a little bit later in the conversation, and then we'll be opening up for our discussion. So we would encourage you to ask questions, make comments on what you agree and disagree with, and also share some of your own experiences as well. On the right-hand side, we have the chat box. I'll just write a little here in the chat box. So please use the chat box as what it says, as a bit of a chat, a bit of a dialogue. And then to the far right, we've got the Q&A. And if you want to ask an actual question, I just put a little thing here. Ask question. Oh, I stopped it. Let's put it here. Second. That's where you can ask your question. So we'll bounce between the chat and the Q&A. Feel free just to write stuff in the chat box of how you're thinking, what you're feeling, anything you agree or disagree with. And then if you've got a question, we can bring you in as well. Over to you, Tom.
Thanks a lot, Luke. I will shortly give the floor to Rob. Rob is currently Professor of Business Society Management at Erasmus University, and he's working with students and therefore future leaders then as well. Within his courses, Rob created also a leadership profiler and is also part of World Connectors, a coalition of connectors from different sectors and disciplines to tackle the SDGs. And Rob will now talk for 5 minutes, so you can already start like thinking about questions and put it in the chat. Also, like we will invite you if you ask the question, but if you are not comfortable with sharing your screen, please say so, then we will ask the question for you. And you still have time right now to quickly comb your hair because we will invite you. The floor over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Luke. I'm not Luce van Kemper. And to be honest, you would, if you know Luce, you would notice immediately because she is a very young, a very nice 25-year-old woman. And I want to introduce her also to you. And maybe that's even better even than to say what I think is important about compassionate leadership in the public sector. Because Luce is the youngest Crown member of the Social Economic Council, which is an institute in the Netherlands which really basically brings all interested parties together to discuss big societal issues. And she is the first young person ever that became a Crown member. That means a representative of the Dutch state, of the public interest. And she did do that on sort of by accident. She actually has a very interesting history, and I will tell you not too much, but what I think is important to know that Luce is a little bit older. So she also did 2 studies. She took not 1 year, but 2 years of the master. She's studying still with us. She does a very exciting internship with KLM, for instance, so she doesn't really sort of shy away from complexity. And within that profile, she became one of the leaders of the young movement in a time that also the public interest was clearly decided upon by vested interest groups. So big companies, big institutional parties like the trade unions, the government and the like. And what we'll see is the last 10 years, that has been sort of recognized, certainly with climate change and with all the other big societal issues, that that's not enough. Young people should have a place at the table. So I'm very proud. So Luce, for me, is one of my heroes also, together with more than 100 students like Tom also that does the master on global business and sustainability, that they not only want to study and earn a lot of money, we are at the business school, but actually use insights from business, from the market sector to help develop public goods and do that in a complex environment. And that's where then leadership starts not only to be thought leadership, because that is what we're talking about, and not shy away from complex issues, which we call 21st century skills, by the way. There are all sorts of words with that. It's creativity also, that Dan Stam also referred to, and all the other elements that were also pronounced by the keynote speakers. And that is something that applies to Luce. For instance, when Paul Polman says passion is finding yourself, purpose is losing yourself for a cause, I think that probably also describes Luce, but also many of the other young leaders. And she has been recognized from that, become then the youngest representative in the Social Economic Council, and also wanted to tackle those complex issues, but also from a pragmatic point of view. So not sort of be negative, critical at the side and basically say, I don't like this and the older generation is responsible for this and you should solve it, which of course is a take, that's a negative sort of emotion. But what she does also is to take this in a positive way, say, okay, how can we try to change it now? Together with others. So that's why the Social Economic Council is so important, because it's a platform for negotiation, partnering, collaboration. I think this is the word you also heard in the previous sessions. And then, of course, develop your own skills. And that's where I think I can herald also Luce's effort. And unfortunately, she's not here because I think she could have tell it yourself. On the other hand, I think it is a sort of happy accident, because I can tell you what I like about Luce in terms of the skills, the attitude, and the leadership that she portrays, which she probably is way too modest to tell you. And of course, she's young, so she still has to learn, and she wants to learn also. And that's one of the reasons why I like her also, not just as a person. I consider myself young also. I'm old, but young in spirit, but also as a teacher and as a coach, because Luce is one of those students that I think should be a role model for everyone else that wants to learn and wants to get coaching from people in practice, from the fellow Crown members of the Social Economic Council, from other students. Tom might say something about it because he studied together with Luce, and also, but then purpose-driven. So this is the young generation that I like so much also, and I can only tell you enthusiastically that I feel privileged also to work together with people like Luce and young professionals, not only as a teacher, but also in the middle of society, where Luce then becomes active in the movement. In the other session, by the way, we have Werner Schouten, who is the young climate change movement leader, and he has been elected #1 in the Netherlands in terms of influencer on the climate change action. So in that sense, this is the new generation of leaders that they're compassionate, they're purposeful, but they also want to learn. And that's, of course, where we as a university really should help them. And I'm not into what Dan also said, to unlearn new things and to make you less creative. I'm trying also to help you to become more creative, which, by the way, and I can tell you that sometimes also leads to very confused students. But yeah, that's the learning environment we want to create. So I can recommend to you to follow Luce also in her career, because I think she will be not only one of the leaders now, but also in the future.
Thanks a lot, Rob. I think this is a wonderful introduction to Luce. Before going into the idea on public leadership and what the public should do, I would still continue a little bit on the discussion that we heard in the keynote speaking panel about compassionate leadership. So we've seen a lot of different aspects and a lot of different concepts coming to the front. Satyarthi explained compassion as courage, risk-taking, and initiative to feel the suffering of the other and act on it. And we saw Hans Reus sharing in the chat his report on the leadership in a decade of action. He talked about 21st century leadership skills and as well thought leadership. So my question is, how do you understand compassionate leadership, and how do you use that then also in your field and in your work?
Well, listen, one of the things that if I do a lecture, and I'm not lecturing, of course, now, is to say, what is public leadership about? And actually, public leadership is complementary to private leadership for companies or civic leadership for civil society organizations, is actually that you want to represent the public good. So what is compassion? You see the public good that is failing. You see poverty, you see inequality, you see climate change, all sorts of problems. And instead of turning your back or deny about it, you say, we're going to deal with this. I'm going to confront this. So leadership actually is courage. And also that word was used in the previous session. It is about understanding that you need to learn. It's also understanding that you cannot do it on your own. So one of the things that I think is really important, that a public leader, also a civil servant or a minister or any type of leadership, will say, I'm not going to see this as an efficiency problem. This is new public management, by the way. Or I'm not going to see this as one interest group, or let's keep it simple, or let's give it to the market. No, actually, there is a real responsibility to be taken also by public leaders for those complex issues. However, the new public leadership, for me, would be the one that says, we need to take responsibility also. We have responsibility, but we cannot do it on our own. And this is, for instance, one of the reasons why it is so important to develop call it new social contracts. That is how it is told. And social contracts then come with partnerships. And it comes also with challenging societal purpose. And of course, that is the SDGs, not the short-term one, profit tomorrow, privatization today, or the long-term, 2050, let's all be happy then by that time, but say 2030, the medium run, and then say, how are we going to act upon this now? Not alone, but together. I think these are the key issues of public leadership. And I think Luce, for instance, knows that.
Thanks a lot for that, Rob. I saw an interesting comment made by Kajus Nijstad in the chat.
Okay.
I think if he's willing, I can invite him to talk here about it as well. But he talked about the Dutch government and that we need in these new days a desperate need of more compassionate leadership. He was talking about the toeslagenaffaire, or in English, the child benefits scandal that happened in the Netherlands, and I do agree that there is, in this time of pandemic and these current political spheres, there is a need of compassionate leadership. So I would ask then also Luce, but also right now you, Rob. So what could we advise, or what should she advise on the government on social and political aspects in that sense?
Well, maybe not everybody in the audience knows what happened in the Netherlands, but actually it is a universal problem. That is, governments, but also companies, banks, for instance, have sort of lost the human touch, the feeling that there are people that you have to rule, or you have to produce product for, or services. So, for instance, the financial crisis, many banks then said, well, why don't we put the customer first? Can you imagine a bank saying, put the customer first? Well, actually, that is the fiduciary duty of a bank anyway. So now they're slowly figuring out that not only putting the customer first is important, but also that if you don't do it, it's risky. And there are now big fines for big banks that they don't know what their customer base is. Now, the same is true for governments. Put the people first. Now, in the past, it is clear that many, also because, of course, of budget deficits or whatever, then you steer on efficiency. But efficiency is a non-human trait. And so if you don't understand that there are people there, or for instance, and that goes from the top of the ministry to the lowest ranks in a say municipality, where there is somebody at the front desk talking about housing or whatever, or mortgages, everybody should have also the time and should get the time to deal with people, not as customers, but as people. This is, of course, the difference between a public institute and a private institute. A bank can look at customers and as people and as clients. A public institute has to look at people, as constituents, as citizens. And that's much more complex because citizens don't only want to buy a product, they are going for needs. So, and if you don't train people, even at the desk in a local city hall, or at the level of the ministry, where then you lose track of actually the people that you're supposed to serve. That is costly, by the way. It's not cheap. You cannot do artificial intelligence to make that work. You have to invest. And I think slowly you see that in the Netherlands, we see the problems. There are triggering events, there are tipping points, there are scandals, and they're really costly, by the way, also the scandals. Now to repair what's happening, what's going wrong, cost more money probably than to make it go, than to prevent this from happening. And this, by the way, was another very interesting quote. I think it was also Paul Polman that says, there is no room for inaction because the cost of inaction are bigger than the cost of action. And I think that applies to sustainable issues, and it applies to the relationship between the public sector and the leadership there and, say, the people.
Thanks a lot, Rob. I saw in the chat that Kais was happily to join the conversation.
Okay.
I tried to add him to it, but that didn't happen yet. Kais, can you maybe try? Yeah, there you are.
Perfect.
What's happening with Maresa, by the way? Yeah.
Hi, Kais.
Yeah, so I've heard that they're still trying to put Maresa in the chat as well, that they're working background on it. But we see that today we have a lot of technical issues. But one of the future leadership skills is also to be resilient. So therefore, flexible indeed. But guys, maybe you can share your thoughts on what you just said on the benefits affairs and what you think that maybe we need in the public sector in order to evolve from that.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you, Tom, for giving me the floor. So I'm definitely from a bit of a different background here. I have a social sciences background, so I very often come at these things, I think, perhaps differently than people with a more traditional business background. But for me, what it's really what that comment is from, it really shows kind of the distrust, kind of the opposite of compassion. What we've seen from the Dutch government lately, where it really comes from a position of distrust and just assuming that people are there to take abuse of the system. To first of all think about why is that a view that's present in these institutions, but also I think if anyone along the line in the tech services or the Ministry of Financial Affairs along there, at one point I think should have thought what is our purpose, and I think purpose has really been missing, and it clearly for me in this whole scandal, because if anyone would have thought about what is the purpose of what we're doing here, it is to serve the Dutch people, and I think it's clear that went wrong on an unimaginable scale. But I think it's also there. I mean, there's also, I think, if anything, if Corona has shown us that it's not lacking throughout government entirely, because we also seen a lot of compassion towards businesses in these troubling times, where all of a sudden governments are able to make giant motions and basically make funds available to keep an economy running. Otherwise, people would have, these same people would have been bankrupted by now if it wasn't for compassion. So it's not a complete lack of, but I think it's also looking at who do you trust and distrust, and is that compassion there for everyone? And I think that's something to keep in mind.
I think this is a great comment, guys. We do a lot of research also on trust in society. So not only in companies, because there's very low trust, but also in governments. And actually, we're living in a lower trust society than ever, almost, and nobody trusts each other. So, for instance, with the government, there's this problem that there's the statement that nobody trusts the government. But I always turn it around, because what we learn now from much of the scandals now at the moment in the Netherlands, but also around the world, is that not necessarily that people don't trust the government, which of course is understandable, but the government doesn't trust the people. And that's even worse, because if you build your model on distrust and on that your call it your reference point, or your default option is, well, they probably will cheat. Like I never look at my students, well, I want to keep them under control because they might cheat. That will be 5% maybe that will cheat. 95% also of people don't cheat or are. So if you use your default option saying, I don't trust the people, I don't trust the audience, then of course, and you know, there is a saying also in business saying, trust building comes by foot, but trust losing goes by horseback, meaning it goes much faster and you never be able to repair it anymore. So we are in the middle of that really trust crisis. And I think leadership then from the public should be, well, we should start trusting people again. Maybe even if there's fraud, but that probably will be a minority compared to the people that are trustworthy, or at least that try to do their best.
And maybe to come into that, Tracy was also putting some very interesting comments in the chat about the kind of a little responsibility of the public as well. Tracy, maybe you can share your standing point over there.
Sure. I think that compassionate leadership is really needed in every sector. I think about the work that I've done in nonprofits, and there's this line where suddenly the goals become about the fundraising in order to keep your mission going. But the mission has to be first. Same in the private sector. A company that is producing food and looking at it just from that, making the bottom line, it's having that purpose. We are feeding people. So keeping those missions and those purposes at the front and center, I think is critical at this time, particularly now that we've been through this just unbelievable moment with COVID and the pandemic. And yeah, so thank you so much for bringing this all together and putting it into thinking about it through that public lens.
Thanks a lot for your comment, Tracy.
Because Maresa is not here, so I'm perfectly capable and willing also to retreat. But as long as I'm here, I will, because I think
we do have Maresa. She'll be joining through Caroline's screen on her audio, so she's ready to go when we are.
Okay, then I'll give a very short answer to your Tracy, because we have in science, we have a nice term called mission drift. And mission drift is actually you go for a purpose, that's social enterprise, but it can be NGOs, that can be government, it can be companies. And unfortunately, the reality then hits you, and then you start slowly looking at more at efficiency. For instance, a company needs to be efficient to a certain extent. A government also needs to be efficient. You cannot throw away taxpayers' money. But too efficient means that you are not, the purpose is not then your goal or your idealistic purpose, but just to work more efficient. So anyway, mission drift is something that is
via de
to help organizations not to...
Wil je mijn druk zodra ik wegval?
We can hear you, Maresa. Not now, because you... Okay. Is that okay, Tracy?
Yes, yes.
There's lots of research, by the way, done also on purpose-driven companies and organizations, and they all start with the right intentions, but at a certain moment they lose that, but they still think they do the right thing. So it is also very important that you are aware where you are in that process.
Tracy and guys, I would kindly ask you to leave the chat now, so that later maybe you can join again, but maybe also other people can join. And then I give the floor to Luke to introduce Maresa.
Super. Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you, Rob, and thank you for our guests and those that were joining the chat as well. The chat box is looking good, so please continue to use it as we move into the second half. Doesn't have to be questions specifically, can just be thoughts and feelings and perhaps things you agree with and disagree with as well. So now I'd love to introduce Maresa Oosterman, who is the Director at the Sustainable Development Goals for the Netherlands. And she'll deliver a short talk before opening up to answer our comments and questions. So if you're ready, Maresa, over to you.
Thank you very much, Luke and Rob, for inviting me. Indeed, we have overcome many technical issues, and I hope it will remain the case. Otherwise, I'll just call in. So thank you very much for inviting me. I've just had my COVID-19 vaccination. Yeah. So if I become increasingly incoherent, then please blame it on the vaccine, not on me. And I think, therefore, it's very appropriate to have this lightning talk, because, of course, it was COVID-19 that struck us like lightning last year. And I think it's a very interesting example of public leadership, because what we saw is that maybe the public leadership in terms of politicians and government weren't quite ready, but the scientific community was very ready. And why were they ready? I mean, it's not like they could predict that COVID-19 could happen, but what happened is that they had the passion to do their work, mainly with for a large amount with public funding. So this also really is the public sector. And because of their passion, they just wanted to know, how do bacteria fight off viruses, all these wars that are happening everywhere around and in us every day to a very large scale? How do they do it? And when they found out, they wanted to know, how do people do it? And how can this knowledge help people? And by the time the vaccine was needed, they were ready. So I think this is a very nice example of how passion is one of the essential qualities of public leadership. And this is about passion. It's, of course, also about compassion, because you need to do it for someone. You know, they did this for the public. And it also it extends to the public, but also, of course, for example, to your own colleagues. You need to cooperate. You need to have an interest in what they want, and especially as a leader, you need to want to give them the opportunity to shine. So passion is the first quality I would mention that is very important for a public leader. Then I would like to go from one crisis to the other, which is climate. So I haven't heard Rob's talk, so maybe he talked about climate as well. I have no idea. It's very popular nowadays. But I would like to tell you a little bit about the golden old days, around 1997, the Kyoto Protocol, because at the time I was a part of the Dutch delegation to negotiate that protocol. And you have to imagine, at the time, there was nothing. There was just a notion that there was this issue here. So we had to make everything up from scratch. And we had to do that in an environment where most people around the world had never heard of climate. And if they did, they didn't believe that it was an issue. And if they believed it was an issue, they only thought that it was too hard or too expensive to deal with. So in those circumstances, we had to sort of craft this protocol, also still at the basis of quite shaky science. A lot was known, but also there were a lot of unknowns. And the only reason that we managed, I think, is because we had a great delegation leader. So this was someone from the Ministry of Environment, and he had a vision. His name was Bert Metz. Maybe some of you know him. Later on, he earned the Nobel Prize together with all his colleagues at the IPCC for his work. But at the time, he was our delegation leader, and he understood this is an enormous problem. It's a long-term problem, but we have to deal with it now. And because of that vision, he was able to pull us through those delegations, helping us all and other countries to start from scratch again and again, and to keep on negotiating, because he believed that this was necessary and he knew where we had to go. And we ended up with a protocol that was, to be honest, stronger than what we have now, because at the time we had targets and timetables for every country. So that's the second quality I would like to mention, vision. You really need to know where you need to be going. Then that brings me to the third quality that I would like to mention, and this is guts. Because even if you have passion and vision, if you don't have guts, you're not going to get anywhere. Because as a public leader, you are up against vested interests and actually also against your own interests. Vested interests because you have to tell, for example, the private sector what they can and can't do, but also your own interests, because most public leaders, they have to be voted in, right? So their interest is to please the voters and to do the right things for their voters in the time frame of 4 years. So that's the time frame. It's very narrow and it's not long term. But what we need from real public leadership is long-term vision. There we have the vision again. And you need to be able to take the decisions now that are in the interest of future generations. And of course, also, you have to take decisions now that are in the interest not only of your own voters, but also of other people around the globe. So you have to do many things that are quite unpopular and will probably not get you re-elected, unless, of course, you are capable of explaining this really well to your voters. My impression at the moment is that politicians don't really feel an urge to explain this type of decisions anymore to their voters. So this is why we end up with all these very short-sighted, short-term policies. So these are the three qualities in a public leader, that I would like to mention: the passion, vision, and guts. And I would be very curious to know that if you were a public leader, which topic would you grab with passion, with vision, and with guts to move ahead? I'll give you mine. It's cultivated meat. So animal products without using the animal, just a few cells, and brewed milk. This is really my passion now, my vision. And I have a little bit of guts because I gathered all those working on this to turn this into a plan for the National Growth Fund. So this is what I'm doing now. But what I'm curious about is, what would you be doing as a public leader? Thank you.
Super. Thank you so much, Maresa. And while we think about that, please feel free to write in the chat, what topic would you take on? What are you passionate about? And let's try and get a conversation going around that. While we wait for some of our guests to process that and to think about it, Maresa, if you could just give us a little definition of what compassionate leadership means to you. Where do you use compassionate leadership in your life? And maybe who do you recognize or admire as a compassionate leader?
So for me, compassionate leadership is being a diplomat, because you really cannot get anything done if you can't, interest people, move people, appease people. In other words, to have empathy, to understand, what do they need. So this is a bit of a utilitarian, maybe, interpretation of compassion, but it is just to link it to what we do in as diplomats. And of course, so that's, let's say, towards the outer world. And I have to say, within our own teams, with our own colleagues, I really not only believe, but also see that people thrive if they feel that you care. And if you trust them, if you give them space, if you're clear about where you want to go, so that's your vision. But also if you can make it very clear that you really need them and want them to feel empowered in their work.
And who is someone that you would admire or call a compassionate leader?
Well, I already mentioned one, that is this Bert Metz, but I'm not sure that many people know him. I would have to think about that. A very obvious one would be Barack Obama, although I have to say, by the time he turned president, it was less visible than in his books and so on, but maybe that's the price he had to pay for having to be a leader in a very difficult environment, where compassion maybe is not the most valued quality.
Yeah, interesting. So we've not had any chats come through just yet, so I'm not sure. We've still got 20 people in the well, now 19. You've still got 19 people watching, so please do share your thoughts. It doesn't have to be a question. It could be a a short statement, or it could just be something that you agree or disagree with from what Maresa has said. A question earlier was on what topics would you be interested in chasing and bringing your passion to, whether it's animals or mental health or climate or some of the things that have been talked about already. Instead of asking another question, I'll hand over to Rob and see maybe what would you pick, Rob, as a topic? What would be your topic?
No. I'm trying now to engage in the conversation, because I think Maresa gave a great pointed speech, also passion, vision, guts, and then an example. Luke, I'm really interested in what is your passion, because I like the meat thing, because that seems so concrete. Also, on the other hand, you have to make it concrete. So I'm much more into sort of fair trade and the big issues, but that is too abstract. So Luke, maybe you can respond to Maresa also, because I'm asking the question now to you.
Super, sure. Well, I'll give a relatively short answer, but my background generally is in teaching. I'm a drama teacher. So a lot of my work is around education, but it's around a more kind of holistic form of education. So the drama teaching that I do, it's not about going into a school and making young people, good at passing a drama exam, and being graded on it. Instead, it's taking drama to things like prisons and refugee camps and vulnerable adult centers, and using drama as a way of kind of, almost like drama therapy. So something I'm very passionate about really is getting a kind of compassionate curriculum, a compassionate education system. And in the UK, we're moving very sort of backwards into a regimented kind of education system. It's about results, it's about passing. There's, even after COVID, there's not a lot of compassion in the English education system. So that's my angle, trying to get a few more people smiling and laughing in their classrooms.
Is there a business model in this, Luke?
There will be. It's in the process. I think COVID has given me some time to think and plan. And yeah, as things are starting to open up, and I won't go too much into my life because I don't want to take too much from Maresa, but I'm actually moving to Vietnam next week to live in Vietnam as an English and drama teacher as of next Thursday. So I kind of gave up with the UK, and I'm going to try my luck with the Vietnamese education system.
Thanks, Luke.
You guys really are so lucky being native English speakers. Welcome everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom, what's your take on this? I want to involve you in the conversation.
Yes, great. I saw in the chat also that Kais is going to join in the conversation as well, talk about his passion.
Yeah, sure.
My passion at this point is sustainable business models. I find that very interesting. So more that take on it. So how do we get companies to change their micro level practices, link that to the SDGs, to the macro level sustainability challenges, and really change the way of working in that, and really add that practicality to business models, sustainable business models. So that's going to be my passion for the upcoming few years. Kais, maybe I can give the floor to you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me on again. If anyone else also wants to join, I don't want to hog the stage. But yeah, nice to see you again, Maresa. It's been a while since we've last seen each other. I used to actually do an internship with Maresa back in the day for SDG Nederland. That's a couple of years back now. But yeah, my passion is mostly around education, because I really believe that education is one of those things where it kind of shapes the way in which we educate a whole generation. I think has a lot of power. First of all, education itself already says a lot about society, right? So what do you teach and what don't you teach, more importantly, because what is considered of value. So that's, I think, already very interesting thing to look at. And also within the educational system, look at inequalities. So, who's being able to move through the education more fluidly and less fluidly. For instance, now I'm part of a research group here at Erasmus together with the diversity and inclusion team, where we're going to look into inequalities within education, and what are the hurdles, what are interventions, and what role can universities play in it as well. Because I think also as a university, If you want a more diverse audience, you have to also actively take part in making sure that audience gets to you. And the second step is also retaining them. I think one of the things I'm very proud of working at RSM is we have the Jouw Wheel program, which is actually a proven effective intervention to help people from diverse backgrounds maintain in higher education or university for this case. So I think looking at it, I thought the discussion before in the panel was interesting as well about creativity in education, because I think a lot of that comes down to what is valued and what isn't within it. So I can imagine, Luke, as you as a drama teacher, that must be something that drama often might not be as valued within the educational system, and it's very result oriented. I think there as well, maybe we've lost sight of the why are we doing this. And I shared a video in the chat there. Anyone who hasn't seen it, I highly recommend watching it. It's called Changing the Paradigm by Ken Robinson, which is one of the most amazing videos I've ever seen, and definitely changed my perspective on it. Kind of letting go of this idea of academic and non-academic, and imagine a new way of looking at it. And that's something I've been working at for years now, and I'll probably keep on doing it for the rest of my life.
Brilliant.
So I'm very happy that this discussion is taking a turn into the direction of education, because no offense to you and me, Rob, but we really messed up, our generation. So we are really dependent on this next generation to speak up and to act up. And so that requires this vision, passion, and guts. And do you have the impression that you can instill this on students? Are they going to be more vocal than we were? Are they going to act quicker on sustainability than we were?
Well, that has been my lifetime passion also in education. That's why I went to university, and I stayed in university. I was a tennis teacher before that, by the way, which is, of course, impactful, has a clear goal, a mission, but nevertheless, not many winners in the end. But the teaching is my passion, and also at the university. And I think I founded the Department of Business Society Management 20 years ago, actually in a business school. So that was something. Then including ethics, governance, all sorts of other, call it sort of out of the box ideas. We even initiated the crazy ideas evenings and whatever. So in order to stimulate creativity, and at the same time to keep our eyes on the ball, meaning the real societal issues. So I'm really happy to say that now, since 5 or 6 years, we have the biggest master in the world on students doing research on business and sustainability issues. And maybe you were not there yet, but I am replacing Luce van Kempen, who is the youngest Crown member of the Social Economic Council. She's a student at mine. Tom is a student. Werner Schouten is a student that studies business, at the same time looking at the public interest and also taking an active role. There is a little problem they have. It will take them a little bit longer. So my efficiency-driven colleagues, some of them, of course, not everyone, would say, well, but they're running out of time. They're not getting their grades. And so I said, well, I don't care if they can combine that with a societal career, which they do. Who cares that you study, say, 2 years or 3 years or 4 years? By the way, most of the older leaders at the moment, so maybe our prime minister, for instance, is one of the people that says you have to study shorter, more efficient, whatever. But he himself took 8 years, I think, on a master in history. So it's all relative. And so one of the things that I really like to support, and I'm doing my best, Maresa, I cannot do more than that, is to create an environment in which that is also supported, and then people also are really supported also to get into action, work with SDG House or the SD Netherlands or UN Global Compact, do an internship, as Lucia now is doing for an internship at KLM. And she knows it's very complex in the middle of a crisis, and she wants to continue to work with them, not because it's easy, but actually because it is something that she really thinks she can contribute to that. I really appreciate that. So yes, I think we are now in a new generation of purpose-driven students, even business students. It's still a minority in the sense that it's 10, 20%, but nevertheless, 10 years ago, that was less than 1%. So we are gaining ground, but we have to do our own bit, Maresa, and I know you do that as well. So I'm trying to do my best to stimulate that as much as possible.
Thank you very much. So unfortunately, I'm afraid we are out of time. That's the end of the session. I think I speak on behalf of everyone when I say that I could easily have sat here for another hour. So thank you so much to Rob for stepping in, and a massive thank you to yourself as well, Maresa, for joining us and giving us such an interesting insight today. Thank you to our guests and all those that were keeping the chat box going. I know that Tom has the statement for Luce, which if you'd like to read, Tom, and once you're finished, we'll hand over to Maresa to give a closing statement and a call to action for us all.
Yeah, so the closing statement from Lucy, she was really sorry that she couldn't attend today. She was looking forward, and she will ask for the recording also to look at this lively discussion. But her call to action, or her final statement that she wanted to share with you, is the first thing is that we need to think long term and intergenerational. The second thing is that we always need to invite other disciplines and backgrounds to the table. And the third one is be courageous, dare to admit mistakes, dare to learn, and dare to take a leap of faith. And I think all those points are really in line with what we heard today and all the other persons speak about. So I'll give the floor to you now, Maresa.
Yeah, thanks. So, well, I would really like to urge the next generation to have that passion, have that vision, and show that guts to really turn this into the world that they want. And we are doing our bit in the sense that with around 2,000 companies and other organizations, about 4,000 citizens, we are now asking our cabinet to make a sustainable coalition agreement, duurzaam regeerakkoord in Dutch, with using the SDGs as a compass, because it's the only long-term sort of compass that we have, and also it's very comprehensive. So I would like to make this call of action. Please all join this movement and sign this manifest for a sustainable coalition agreement or duurzaam regeerakkoord. You can find the link in the chat. Thank you, and thank you for organizing this.
Thank you so much, everyone. So now the breakout sessions will be ending, but you can, on the left side of your screen, click on Expo, where you can go to some of the booths and see a little bit about various organizations. As I mentioned, I'm here through, and Kailash and Shweta were all here through PeaceJam. So if you want to learn a little bit more about the organization PeaceJam, what we do, you can find me on the little PeaceJam booth. I'll be there for the next hour with some friends. And Tom as well has a little booth that he'd like to tell you about.
Yes, so for the BSM alumni who are here in the chat, we are launching a BSM Alumni Association in which we create a community to really stay in close contact with each other. So I would kindly invite you to come there and to fill in the survey so that we can reach out to you and really can start this community. I will be there. We have a live session so we can talk to you. So I kindly invite you to there as well.
Super.
And then maybe thank you. Thank you to Rob for being so flexible and having this interesting conversation, and to Maresa as well with your interesting insights. And Luke as well, a big thank you to you for moderating this as well.
Super. Thank you. It was a pleasure.